So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and we make a return to the updated version of CIRITH UNGOL today, which is probably one of the starker differences in terms of a fully updated set-piece map, really, in comparison to the old version, which was honestly more of like a 4v4 style King of the Hill map, where there was a fortress in the middle and then you would kind of fight over it, more of a field battle. But this is definitely one of the starker examples of it being turned into a siege map, I think. A very large fortress, and this is a 2v3, so I will be interested to see how the space is actually utilised on this one. I would imagine what we'll probably see with this amount of players is a outer defence, and then that will pretty quickly transition into a defence for the further reaches of the settlement and the final stand over here. And some of the pathways through the fortress, as is the case in many of these bigger maps, do tend to be quicker to that location than others, which may facilitate how quickly or slowly the defenders choose to retreat. But this is going to be a lore-friendly one as well. We have Gondor and Dol Amroth, ever the close allies, besieging Mordor, who are on home turf, and of course, as you can see from the gold in the distance, they're going to be joined by their easterling underlings in the shape of Rhun, Diego Rio Ramos playing as them, and Thanatos, who sent me this battle replay, so big thank you to him, is going to be playing as the Orcs of Mordor, playing on home turf. But as always, we shall go through the attacking armies first and foremost, starting off with the Dol Amrothians, who are going to be attacking as a twosome from the south, while Gondor will have to go it alone in the north. But if you were going to have it that way around, you probably would choose it. Gondor a little bit more suited for siege maps. Dol Amroth's strength in heavy cavalry doesn't tend to serve them too well in siege battles such as this, but they do have some expertise in terms of infantry. It's not as widespread perhaps as the Gondorians, but they do have their own unique strengths in that regard. Dol Amroth's spearmen are more of a functional unit, however, with one level of armour upgrade here. They are going to be reasonably resilient, and against the more entry-level Orcish units they should be able to outlast them fairly easily, but they will struggle when it comes to dealing damage to the higher tiers, and especially stuff like trolls, and later on perhaps the Easterlings with their armour-piercing focus could be a bit of a problem for both Dol Amroth and for Gondor. And just in behind them we have the Dol Amroth men-at-arms, of course, a little bit more suited for taking on enemy infantry in a close melee, which I think is going to be more important here than the added defensive acumen of the spearmen just in front of them. And I don't think there's going to be too much in the way of cavalry action on either side. I might be wrong. But yeah, it's going to be more difficult to use cavalry, especially in a siege battle such as this, where there are going to be more constricting areas, and also it's one with some pretty varied elevation as well, which can make cavalry a little bit more tough to use. So I think these swordsmen are going to see a little bit more use perhaps than the spears, but as a combination they should do just fine. An upgraded unit of Dol Amroth archers as well. I think in terms of trading back and forth with arrow fire, I mean, Mordor and Rhun together are certainly not defenceless in that regard. But Dol Amroth, especially with some Gondorian support, should be able to dominate in terms of a elongated skirmish, even with some of the defensive bonuses that you have from being the defenders in this sort of situation. I think where that could turn around is if Rhun are able to utilise their specialty projectiles on the other side, and if Mordor are able to take cover a little bit more and maybe try and get in and amongst the archers with armour-piercing archers as well as something that Mordor have, which Dol Amroth don't. So that may prove to be a factor on this side of things. Talon Knights, which are going to be a far more expensive unit of infantry, but also a far more effective one, especially against Mordor. Those maces are going to come in very handy for cracking through the armour that the Orcs do wear, and pretty much all of their defensive ability does come from them. But also, in terms of facing off against the higher tier units, that armour piercing is going to be handy. And they're resilient as well. Those shields will come in handy as they try to push their way through the settlement. A couple of units of them, not too numerous, but they will add a nice bit of armour piercing crunch in the middle of all of these spears and swordsmen who are the more rank and file. Just in behind we have the unupgraded halberdiers, which is an interesting choice because in terms of mitigating that damage that arrow fire can do to them, the armour probably suits a phalanx unit the most. But then again, if you do use them purely in melee, which is the intention, the range on their weaponry should be enough to keep them out of harm's way, more so than the spears and swordsmen just in front of them. So that is the trade-off that you make. But a nice armour-piercing phalanx this. Among the human halberds, they are one of the more dependable units that you can draw upon. And of course, in terms of the forces that they're facing off against today, both of the defending armies don't have access to pikes, so they're not in any danger of being outranged in melee. Several units of the Belfalas Marines. This is one of the main changes the Dol Amroth's infantry force has undergone. Many forces cannot bring javelins in the amount that Dol Amroth can. The Belfast Marines, you can bring 4 before you incur the cost increase, which is a big deal because it does mean that Dol Amroth now have a close range supporting unit, which is especially useful in a siege, you would suggest. So if they can get into a good position, these javelins could wreak havoc on the Mordor defensive force. They're not terrible in melee either, but certainly it's more intended as a sort of wave to finish the enemy off rather than one to depend upon to get the job done, if that makes sense. And then just in behind, something that Dol Amroth have always been known for, both examples of their heavy swordsmen, with the Perithil champions here, very strong unit in their own right, and they should be able to cleave their way through, especially some of the lowly orcs, very, very quickly. And then the even stronger version, of course, the bodyguard tier version, the Haven Guard of Athalond, always one of the more striking units in its class that the game has had to offer. I did notice as well in the distance that they have decided to punt for a little bit of cavalry. We've got some Swan Knights, which this updated variant of the Swan Knights in terms of how they look is probably my favourite looking unit of cavalry in the game. They're not all round the strongest, of course, because they are ultimately a regular unit of Lancers. They do have that full charge bonus, which is nice, but again, can they utilise it? If they can, it can be a real value getter in a siege, but if they can't, it's a pretty big money sink that could have been spent on some strong infantry, especially when you consider it's also gone for the Perithil Horse Guard, which in this case I can see a little bit more merit, if only because if the defenders did sally out, this is the kind of unit which can give many a unit of opposition cavalry pause. And then the supporting force here from Fries and Rice, we see here the unupgraded Dol Amroth of Men-at-Arms with standard swordsmen. Once again, the Perithil champions pushing up a siege tower. The Trebuchet as well, which of course in siege battles like this we've seen be very effective in a few of the battles this side of the new year. And the Trebuchet crew as well could prove to be a pretty useful unit as the battle rages on as well, with those Warhammers. Some more Dol Amroth Men-at-Arms, again not too surprising to see them in high numbers. More Talon Knights, more Haven Guard of Athalond, more of the Perithil champions as well with those two-handed swords. So plenty of quality infantry for Dol Amroth here, augmented by all of these Men-at-Arms. No spears by the looks of things in this army. Well, one unit pushing up the ram, but less than his Dol Amroth counterpart. Two units of Perithil Horse Guard again. It's a lot of cavalry. I understand that Dol Amroth are strong in terms of cavalry, and if a faction can make it work, maybe they can, but still. I think maybe the fact that it's a 2v3 might help them, because in that phase where the defenders maybe have to move around a bit in the settlement, the added space might favour cavalry units like this, but they have to be ready to take that opportunity when it comes. And then 3 units of Belfast Marines as well, and then way on the other side of the settlement, as we skip over Shelob's tunnels and to the North Gate, we have Gondor CMC 6 going to be playing as them. We have got some Gondor infantry and Gondor spearmen, all with various levels of armour upgrades, some with just the shoulder pauldron, some with the full plate, and of course Gondor have a slightly more favourable armour upgrade rate when it comes to most, although these spears don't have any armour upgrades at all. But the same principle applies here. The spears are not going to be quite as effective against their opposition in terms of infantry, but they are a little bit more defensively sound, although with the armour upgrades and with the added numbers, I think the Gondor infantry are definitely the way to go here, albeit they are up against the Easterlings on this side, so armour piercing is going to be something they will have to deal with. Fully upgraded Gondor spearmen as well, and then I think we'll start to get into some of the more hefty units that Gondor have a little bit further back, in addition to some more regular units. We've got the Gondor archers here with the full upgrades as well, so again trying to really hammer home that advantage they should have at longer ranges. If they're able to make that pay or not, we shall see. The Fountain Guard are going to be a very effective unit against most of what the defenders have, to be fair. Even some of the higher tier units are not going to particularly enjoy being in melee with the Fountain Guard, as ever being the heart and soul of most Gondorian infantry forces. Another unit of Gondor archers, this time with just 2 levels of armour upgrades. Not quite the all the way with the other ones that we see. Gondor, the only faction on the field today which enjoy access to a unit of pikes, the Guards of Osgiliath. Not too dissimilar to the equivalents that you see from the Arnorian kingdoms to the north in stuff like the Enuminous Gate Guards. They fill much a similar role, albeit Gondor are a little bit less dependent on them than perhaps their Arnorian brothers. They've got a few more options in that regard in terms of defensive infantry, but still very useful to have even if there's just one unit. We have the Pelagia Marines, which are very similar to the Belfast Marines, but Gondor can't bring them quite as much, but then they don't need to, because they've got alternative options where Dol Amroth do not. Axum of Lasarnak offer Gondor one of their only options when it comes to armour piercing up close and personal for a more reasonable cost. Many of their higher tier units do have it, But even then, it comes with a more defensively minded spear unit, whereas all of these Axemen of Lasarnak being axes are going to be a little bit more aggressive. And finally, the Nimlothian Honor Guard, which are pretty much the ultimate example of that. They do have armor piercing, but they are ultimately a defensively minded spear bodyguard unit. But still, a very strong unit indeed, and able to outlast most that comes their way. But now we shall move on to the defenders, and we shall start off over here with the Runic army, which is under the command of Diego Rio Ramos. As we mentioned, armor piercing going to be very, very useful against the Gondorians. The Scion Rim are going to be more of a defensively minded unit, though, to go toe-to-toe with the more heavy-duty Gondorians on the front line, and they're very, very good at that as well. Pretty expensive, but very good at it. Carmel's chosen, the Runic bodyguard unit in terms of pure infantry. Nothing too special in terms of what they offer, at least among fellow bodyguard units, of course, one-to-one. They will still give many of those Gondorians a good seeing to, but they're going to be much more the core of this defence rather than the be-all and end-all. Gamprim, as we mentioned, halberdiers do get outranged by pikes, but Gondor haven't brought pikes in the numbers where Rhun should be too concerned about that. I think if they position them correctly, they should still do just fine. Of course, Rhun do have the advantage over here, especially of crossfire set up, and that's exactly what 2 units of Carmel's shadow bows can offer you. Gondor, I think, have probably drawn the short straw in terms of the approach play here. They're going to have to be a little bit more conservative, I think, if they're going to make this work. A couple of units of Carmel's Immortals, not too expensive. They don't have a shield, which is a bit of a problem, especially if they're on the attack, but they do offer a little bit more than your basic units in melee as a result with that extra melee defense. You have some cavalry over here as well. The Dragon Knights, ironically enough, Gondor don't have any mounted units of their own, so they could run rampant as they please, or they may be used to try and counteract the Dol Amrothians over on the other side. And then I think that's pretty much it from what we can see. Eastron Crossbow is going to be key over here as well when it comes to dealing with those Gondorians. Meanwhile, up here, Thanatos, the first unit of his that we see is the Sauron's Will, so higher tier axe units again. Armor piercing, not too surprising to see more of a leaning towards that, because all of the attackers are going to be dependent on their armor to some extent or another. Sauron's Will once again. Regular Uruk infantry and Orc maulers, of course, individually speaking, are not too much to write home about, but the Uruk infantry are numerous enough to be able to hold the line for long enough for other Mordor units to do the business. And Orc maulers' cheap armor piercing is going to be something which could be used to good effect here. And Temple Guard, we already mentioned the fact that Mordor do have access to this unit of steel bows, which armor piercing projectiles could be very, very effective in this sort of situation. Some of the runic units are over here as well, which makes sense because 2 armies are down here, so they may need a little bit more to deal with the situation. And the Dragon's Wrath crossbows are a big unit to reinforce with. Specialty projectiles, very strong with those crossbow bolts, and also strong in melee as well. And a second unit of crossbows, so the Easterlings going a little bit more for ranged support over here, especially when you add in some Balkoth Sapphire Bladesmen as well, relying on Mordor to be the infantry force over here. A couple of units of Uruk halberds. They do get outclassed by the Athalond halberdiers, but again, there's not too many of the halberdiers on display for Dol Amroth, so Mordor might not be too worried about that either. They can set up as they please. Olag Kai, very, very strong. Of course, the damage spike that trolls offer over a certain length of time is very significant. Dol Amroth may be a little bit better for dealing with trolls than a few other forces. The heavy swordsmen and some of their armor-piercing macemen in conjunction with one another could bring the trolls down decently well enough, especially with some javelin support, but still, against some of the rank-and-file swords and spears, those trolls will have a field day. Orc maulers, a couple of units of them once again, a bit of cheap armor-piercing. To keep some of the rank-and-file in line, the troll drummers as well, that morale-boosting capability, very useful. More maulers, going perhaps more for maulers even than basic infantry. Morgul chosen here as well, and then Uruk chieftains and the Nazgul right on the front line. So there's going to be no rest right from the off here for Dol Amroth. They're going to have to deal with some serious players, and the Uruk chieftains as well do have that extra armor piercing as well. So very much a theme behind the defenders here, Temple Executioners as well, and yeah, makes a great deal of sense considering who they're up against. But I will make a bit of a cut because I don't know how quickly the attacks are going to move forward. Dol Amroth may opt to link up with one another before moving forward, but again, we shall wait and see. We shall rejoin when the first blows are being struck. So we may as well rejoin here as the gates are on the verge of being battered down here in the southern approach to CIRITH UNGOL, with Dol Amroth understandably I think going to be the more aggressive of the two because of the 2-1 split that the attackers are working with. Simply having more numbers down here is going to help their cause. Plenty of these men-at-arms as well, so plenty of the rank and file. I think this is really going to favour Dol Amroth's swordsman, at least when it comes to facing off against some of the regular Mordor units. Just in general as well, the added damage that they are capable of dealing is going to be important, I think, for dealing with some of the numbers that Mordor are going to be able to supply on the defence, and also trying to deal with some of those really high-end units that Mordor tends to have access to as well in this sort of situation. CMC, meanwhile, also now doing the same here in the north. A few of these units moving forwards, the siege towers as well. Quite a few of those Gondor spearmen. It's worth keeping tabs on what the runic knights are going to be doing, because they have got a lot of punch that they can provide, and that's certainly the sort of damage that Gondor cannot really afford to be taking, given the nature of the approach that they've been given. I already mentioned how there's more potential for crossfire in the northern part of the map, not really true down here in the south, so that does favour the attackers in a way, because it means the area where they kind of have to be more aggressive because of their numbers, they aren't going to be punished quite so severely for doing that. Maulers up on the walls. Amroth stacking up, but not yet ready to come rushing through the gates. And there are a few very high-end units. I mean, we did see the Nazgul, although it does look as though they've been moved back just a little bit. Pretty much all of the Mordor bodyguard units are going to be on display right from the beginning here, it seems. Amroth now going to start making a move to attempt to occupy the walls. And it looks like, well, they were, and then they stopped, of course. Mordor moving forwards now, forcing the issue a little bit, coming out of the battered down gates. I mean, phasing through the wall, but that's more a result of the clipping issues of the gatehouse as a whole. I mean, that's a strange move for Mordor to make. It's the first combat that the battle has seen, but they didn't really need to do that. And as a result, Dol Amroth need no invitation to move forward even more. Those Uruk infantry are not going to have a good time unless they're supported. I mean, the Mordor chosen coming in from the side, but it's a good opportunity for Dol Amroth to get a good amount of value pretty early on here, sort of thing which can lead to a bit of a doom spiral for the defenders if they're not careful. Mordor less susceptible perhaps than other factions, other than Morgul chosen burrowing into the position. The presence of the Parathyl champions is good. It means that they do have a higher quality, higher damage capability unit in there. It's not just the rank and file where this sort of thing would probably be more of an issue for them. The presence of the Uruk chieftains is going to be a potential problem. Dol Amroth now also getting up onto the walls. They can occupy that and then maybe get a couple of units of archers up here. That will make occupying this initial part of the fortress just a little bit less painful for them. The unit of men-at-arms as well. It's going reasonably well for Dol Amroth. I mean, that's a good amount of ground cleared by the Morgul chosen, and with the Uruk chieftains following it, it is going to deal a good amount of damage. But the numbers Dol Amroth have should mean that this won't be too much of a concern for them. Gondor infantry climbing down back off the tower now, seeing the flag rim take up position, and perhaps unsurprisingly less keen to be as aggressive. The rest of the Gondorian army now moving forwards, and they do still have a good amount of numbers here, but it's the slightly higher quality of a lot of these runic units that they're able to bring because they're the defenders, and also the prevalence of the armor piercing, which is going to be so useful against the Gondorians, which is going to make this a little bit more of a tricky prospect. Meanwhile, Orc Maulers now moving forward to try and clear some of these Dol Amrothians off the walls, not allowing them to take it freely. I mean, the initial line was easily swallowed up by the Axemen. Amroth now climbing down off the wall, maybe trying to overlap the Mordor defence, which has stabilised in the interim. The Uruk Halberds will really help with that. The Phalanx unit on the front, especially when it's not really being answered in turn. That's Marines throwing a few javelins, trying to throw it through the gap, but many of them having to throw over the wall. So, I mean, this will score a few kills, but it's not going to be absolutely devastating for the time being. Although the further forward Mordor push, you can see that more and more of those are going to be able to fly on that straight trajectory. That will do a decent amount of damage to all of these defending orcs. Uruk chieftains right in the thick of it. they will be pretty efficient against most of what Dol Amroth have, so they do need to get a few more units on the front line here, Dol Amroth. They can't be shy about committing more infantry units, even if it's just more Dol Amroth spearmen, just to keep the attack going. So it started off reasonably well, and Mordor maybe jumped the gun a little bit and tried to counter-attack, but the situation has started to tick back in favour of the defenders since then. Dol Amroth man-at-arms now. Talon Knights on the way forward. I mean, the armour piercing on them isn't going to be necessarily the most necessary thing against the Orc Maulers, but the sheer quality will mean that these lowly tier units are not going to be able to hang with the best of them here. Drummers. Again, the Parathor Champions, I believe, are a fear-causing unit. Out of ammunition, this unit of Belfast Marines, so at least they are sending something else forward. Remember, they do have a little bit less in terms of their defensive abilities than other units, but still they're perfectly competent in melee, especially against basic orcs. Those axes will still be enough to do the job. Although, Mordor responding in a big way with the Olag High, so now they're going to need to commit something a little bit more serious forward if they are going to have any sort of joy here. It's a distinct possibility still, which is surprising. I know it isn't the Nazgul, although the Nazgul are a little bit isolated. Talon Knights and Dol Amroth man-at-arms all around them. Do better when they're in and amongst their own units, but they should still be fine, but they will take a lot more damage than they would have done otherwise. Units up on the walls though, plenty more reinforcements ready to be committed. A unit of extra spearmen probably isn't the call. We need another unit of heavy swordsmen to try and deal with the heft of these Olag High. Meanwhile, Gondor beginning proceedings here in the north. A single unit of Gondor spearmen is unlikely to give them the forward drive early here, but it is the opening gambit. Carmel's Immortals will do perfectly well in melee, especially when backed up by those Gamperin. Again, trying to use those Pelagia Marines to fire through the gatehouse, much like how Dol Amroth did in the south. Gondor are doing the same in the north, but again they're running into kind of the same problems, so it's not an easy shot for them to make, so they will be doing damage, but it won't be a devastating amount by any means. Gondor Spearmen attacking into the Carmel's Chosen. This isn't likely to end positively for them at all. Again, they are putting pressure on. Maybe if they follow that up with a higher quality unit, things could start to go their way. Again, Gondor Infantry, perfectly good as a standard force, but Flag Rim are pretty perfect for dealing with them in an efficient manner, cracking through the fully upgraded armour that they have brought. And over here, again, same sort of thing, and also the Gondor infantry pretty much across the board is shaken as they try to wrestle for control of the walls with the Easterlings. Defeat looking pretty likely at the moment. Quality may be needed. This is exactly the sort of engagement that Rhun will be pretty comfortable in. Talon Knights up on the wall, taking some hits there from the strong crossbows. Taking artillery fire. Some manner of artillery. Not exactly in the perfect position to do so. Yeah, the problem here, crossbows and Talon Knights are a very valid target to go after. I have actually been pulled off the front line mostly. Some of those Dol Amroth spearmen maybe rather foolishly trying to follow them in. Dol Amroth halberdiers now moving forward, responding in kind to the Mordor lines, who, you know, they are starting to look a little bit thin in places. It can be easily rectified by the application of some of these Temple Executioners to deal with the few spearmen that are starting to trickle through the initial defences. See how that goes. Dol Amroth halberdiers as well. Ooh, that is most unfortunate. Probably one of the most unlucky examples of friendly fire I've seen in quite a while, honestly. Right through the middle and killing off a lot of their own Talon Knights and some Belfast Marines in for the deal. I feel for fries and rice there. I mean, artillery is always a little bit of a gamble, but I mean, on that occasion, you can't really account for being that unlucky. Poor guy. Anyway, we'll see if he can do some good damage. He's got to go over and above now to make up for the friendly fire, those artillery crewmen. Old Amroth Man-at-Arms now down at ground level, managing to slip through the lines. Again, there is a little bit of a fire lit under Dol Amroth now, because the longer they continue to take damage from those runic crossbowmen, the more difficult it's going to be in the long run for them to sustain their manpower advantage. Amroth Man-at-Arms moving forward. I mean, unupgraded, should be okay against the Orc Maulers. I mean, they're not the most impressive unit anyway, but just the fact that they're claiming some map control here can only be a good thing. The Olag High being recommitted to the lines, maybe as a response to the halberds being added in, and buckle that formation a little bit. That damaged unit of Talon Knights is now moving forward as well. You may as well at this point in proceedings. There are the Nazgul scooting across. Dol Amroth able to push their way through the Orc Maulers now and get as many of those units down at ground level as they can, but they are going to have to deal with the Nazgul from the rear anyway. Javelins trying to go after them, but that's a very difficult shot to make. Any javelins that hit is going to be a very fortunate thing. There are halberds on the way forwards as well. Drummers. And over here, Gondor Spearmen have been joined on the front line by the Axemen of Lasarnak, a significantly more damaging unit, which is probably why the Carmel's Immortals have fallen by the wayside pretty quickly. The added presence of the Scion Rim, admittedly the Axemen should be pretty good against them, but the support of the arrows in the back and just the general hardiness of the spears in general means that Gondor are going to need a little bit more if they are going to start pushing forwards. Again, the presence of the Axemen has certainly helped though. Gondor's initial wave was a little bit more flimsy than this, but the added damage has definitely started to have an impact there. More Gondor infantry have also been committed forwards over here by the looks of things, because, yeah, a second unit, just to keep the attack going, perhaps. I mean, again, it's going to be painful for them, but keeping the attack going on multiple fronts is in Gondor's favour here, because they are making progress elsewhere, so making sure that these other units are tied up and can't be moved around is going to be key. Second unit of Immortals ready to move forward. Shadow bows fairly easily able to make their shots. Pelagia Marines also being committed forward, out of ammo as well perhaps, but just more warm bodies on the front line to keep the assault going, because those shadow bows have started to have a pretty quick impact over here. Carmel's chosen. Still victory seems certain for them, obviously a very high tier unit, but split up as they are, Gondor could commit more reinforcements as well. Probably be enough to cause serious issues. Gondor infantry on the way forwards as well. So far the situation is still controlled by Rhun fairly comfortably, but that could change with Gondor's increasing quality as things go along. Dol Amroth, meanwhile, have started to push the Mordor lines backwards. I mean, it is costing them, of course. This range support, and now Sauron's will being committed forwards as well. Big armor-piercing damage from them. Just behind, again, Nazgul making a nuisance of themselves. Olag High still going strong as well. That's the real issue when it comes to dealing with them. Trying to make them fall by the wayside is not the easiest thing in the world. Strong's reloading. Sapphire Bladesman in the background as well. This runic support has definitely come in handy, because there is lots of damage being dealt. Sauron's will, again, regular Dol Amroth Man-at-Arms will do their best, but they They're going to be heavily outfought here against a unit that can deal that kind of damage. So again, more reinforcements necessary. Perhaps Parathil champions now moving forward. I mean, Dol Amroth now have the ability to get some of their archers up on the walls or just move their archers into the fortress. It's risky, but they need to get their support into better positions, I think. As that has been a point of difference so far over on this engagement. The defenders have definitely been able to make good use. So Fire Bladesman, Ardenheim Shadowbow, so plenty of the, and Temple Guard as well, plenty of these really high damage units. I mean, there's not a huge amount of units left in reserve from a Mordor perspective, however, whereas when we look at Dol Amroth, they still stretch really far into the backfield. Admittedly, some of that is cavalry, which the utility of which I'm not really sure whether that's going to be super useful. This sort of situation. Belfast Marines on the walls, Parathil champions moving in, immediately attracting the attention of the crossbows as well. It's a relatively thin line now though. Uruk halberds going up against the Dol Amroth equivalent, although there's very few of the Dol Amroth ones left. Probably a result of their encounter with the trolls. Some Parathil champions remaining from the initial engagement, I think, now the fresh unit has arrived. And the Nazgul, only 8 of them, but still proving to be a problem for the Dol Amrothian swordsman. In amongst things, I think the defenders will still be pretty pleased. I think the issue is going to come a little bit later when more and more of these reinforcements come pouring forwards and they don't necessarily have an infinite amount of reinforcements. Time will tell whether the defenders think it's worth their while to even fall back. Again, a 2v3, it can be worth it to just try and stack your outer defence and end the battle there one way or another. Infantry taking those hits, the arrows snapping on the blackened walls. These Flag Rim have, well, I mean, they definitely will have been efficient in this engagement. Whether or not efficient is going to be enough in the long run, we'll just have to wait and see what the result of the battle overall is. Infantry managing to run through one of the Easterlings there. Numbers definitely proving to be Gondor's friend there. Yet to see some of the really heavy hitters as well. Ardenheim Shadowbows against the more lightly armoured unit of Gondor infantry as well. Unlikely to be a fun experience for them. Ground level, that unit of Carmel's Immortals being committed forward gave Rhun the necessary numbers to be able to hold on here. The Guards of Osgiliath going to be a real problem there. Gamprim will find themselves outranged, and see there looming in the background Arden and Lothian Honour Guard, so Gondor will commit forward their highest quality units at a moment's notice. What will Diego do? Still have the numbers advantage here though, so I don't think he'll be too concerned for the time being. Considering the rather simplistic nature of a lot of these engagements so far as well, I think the main thing for Rhun has actually been utilising and moving around their ranged support units to try and help Mordor out, and it does look as though Dol Amroth's attack is on the verge of complete collapse, which is a little bit of a problem. I did mention how they don't necessarily have the most amount of reinforcements in the world down here, the defenders. If Dol Amroth were able to keep that attack going, that could have been good for them, but a little bit flat-footed here when it came to committing forward more of their basic infantry, and as a result, it does look as though they're going to be sent packing in their entirety. In fact, they have been, pretty much. Just a few of their heavy swordsmen on the front lines still fighting the good fight, but most certainly in vain. They commit forward more units. Looks like they're going to try and go for the full reset instead. Marines. They've still got stuff like the Haven Guard and Talon Knights, so quality is still here. A renewed assault might yield the results they want, but it would have been better, I think, if it had been continuous. See how key that could be later on. More runic units coming across as well, so Rhun clearly feeling, rightly or wrongly, comfortable in their engagement against Gondor in the north. I guess I can see why. Fire arrows being used, which is, yeah, this is a real waste of the Athelian Rangers, to be honest. That's high damage projectiles, which you're overusing ammunition for as a result of the fire arrows, and also you're not really hitting a great deal of anything using them in a position like that. Or infantry as well, still the Scion Rim now being committed up onto the walls as well. Amount of Gondor left. It was always likely to be the thing which hurt them in the long run. Carmel's Chosen have done very, very well for themselves in this engagement up here, although I think some added support from stuff like the Shadow Bows and other such units probably gave them a bit of a helping hand, because that was a lot of units for them alone to kill off, and it was also a perfect shot for Rhune's supporting units. Oof. The crumbling walls, and a lot of Sauron's will just fell to their death there. Beginning maybe of the redemption arc for the Trebuchet for their earlier transgressions. And I mean, quite a lot of them stuck on the tower now. It does give them an easier way into the settlement as well. Big amount of damage there. Still not ready to recommence their infantry assault, however, in the wake of the first one's failure. Dol Amroth Men-at-Arms, but still the Olag higher there, starting to take losses now. Sauron's will certainly not as scary as they once were. Again, another good hit there from the Trebuchet. Olag Rim, not devastating, but still, it's a start to make up for their misgivings. Talon Knights now moving forward, toe to toe with the Temple Executioners. High tier unit tussle. Talon Knights in better condition though, and have readier access to support by the looks of things. Direct hit on that Olag High there. Marines, this is where they can prove themselves as an auxiliary infantry unit, I suppose. Panzer forces evenly matched for the time being, but I mean, this renewed assault from Dol Amroth I think will be a game changer, a game maker at the very least. Haven Guard of Thalon moving forward, lots of Dol Amroth quality, more numbers now. Mordor having to rely on some of their rank and file, not necessarily as ready access to support as they used to have, but Temple Guard still in a good position to get some raking shots there. Dol Amroth Man-at-Arms going up against a slightly depleted unit of Sauron's will also. Just in behind, still a few units of Balthlas Marines they can commit forward, but I mean, in terms of infantry, much of what they have left in the backfield is cavalry, so this kind of needs to work for Dol Amroth and for the attackers as a whole, to be honest, because Gondor are struggling to make inroads in the north. Plenty of numbers to hack their way through, but Dol Amroth's baseline is of higher quality than Mordor's, and there's going to be stuff like the Talon Knights and the Haven Guard that are going to be the ones here. Haven Guard now going up against the already bloodied Olag High. That should be enough to finally bring the trolls down. Indeed, one of them does fall, and more of them will follow. North, meanwhile, Fountain Guard starting to have that impact again. This was always going to be a possibility. Gondor's high-end quality infantry is very resilient, but also has that damage-dealing sting. Gamperim have moved forwards as well. Try and shore things up. Axemen of Lasarnak, but surrounded as they are by Chosen and Flagrim. It's more of a token effort, really. Another unit of Gondor infantry looks like they've returned from routing, if anything. Just sort of scrabbling to try and get some units to get some map control. And they really ought to be trying to get those archers up on the walls, even if they have ammunition at this point. It's one of the rare situations where I think you just kind of need to get some numbers up there, try and secure some territory. At the moment, this fight at the gatehouse is the only one that looks like it's likely to bear any sort of fruit for Gondor. Here, meanwhile, siege towers crumbling. The trebuchet could be really devastating here, hitting on the front lines. Even if they're only low-tier units, that just means they're likely to rout that much more quickly. Crossbows have definitely earned their keep at range, and now they're just being used as fodder in melee. Will they hit? Still twisting a little bit. Javelins trying to throw at point blank. They are going to be scoring some hits, not necessarily the most efficient ones, but it's better than nothing at this point. Try and do that damage. Halberds also in place. The Haven Guard definitely have had a very positive impact on the engagement from the Dol Amroth perspective over here. Shower of javelins. Still a pretty long way in this battle to go, which is kind of surprising when you consider how much damage both sides have taken at this point. So perhaps there will be some manner of retreat at some point from the defenders, albeit they're leaving it a little late. They don't have many units they can do it with. Crossbows, Temple Guard, a few units there in the backfield. Occasional javelin shot being ballooned high. Lots of forces evenly matched. A distinct possibilities of pushing back in certain places again. If they do push outside the settlement, though, the cavalry needs to be on hand to try and do something here. Cavalry actually is trying to force through now as well, being used purely as a battering ram. Get through these units, but again, their charge is so devastating, the Swan Knights, but infantry is blocking the way. They don't really have the room to operate in a situation like this, which was always likely to be bit of a problem. There goes a general. Could be Gondor's or Rhun's, that actually, given the units that were present. I think it was probably Gondor's based on the Nimrothians being in shots, but Temple Guard out of ammunition now, it seems. Committed to melee. Two-handed blades in hand, as well as the Sapphire Bladesmen as well, so they do still have their share of quality here. Is going to break first. It is a close run thing, this, as much as I think the defenders have probably handled the battle overall a little better than the attackers. That kind of needs to be the case when you're outnumbered 3-2. And ultimately one misstep could still let this cavalry in. There's still plenty of plays that the attackers can make to put the defenders in a very uncomfortable position. More cavalry now. I mean, at least the sword cavalry is going to be a little bit more comfortable in melee. Seems still for the defensive line. Swan Knights in behind enemy lines, but what they're going to be able to do with that, not quite sure. They are in a position where they could get some hammer and anvil strikes. The defenders see that and they're just going to try and bog them down and make sure they can't get up to speed. Additional crossbows. Gondor infantry routing through the fortress, which actually will cause a little bit of chaos. Still fighting well down here at ground level. They may actually get a narrow victory here, Gondor. It may very well be the same for Dol Amroth in the south, so some decisions are going to have to be made now by the defenders, I think, and come down largely to trying to find a unified front. Still the small matter of the Dragon Knights. Their archers up on the walls. Shadowbows, are they thinking of retreating any of their units? It doesn't look like it. I mean, there's not many of these units which it's even feasible to retreat at this point. Guardian Marines intercepting the movement of these flag rim. Another messy engagement begins. And then still a few of the guards of Osgiliath remaining, but it's mostly Fountain Guard at this point. Fountain Guard will certainly be the remedy for dealing with the Scion Rim on the front line. Strong crossbows as well. Over here. Iron shadow bows. Still getting in the way of those Swan Knights from doing their thing, but Perithal Horse Guard also in behind enemy lines. It has become a very chaotic fight now down here as a result of the cavalry being present. Dol Amroth are starting to wash over this position. It's just whether or not the damage they're taking on the way through from units like the Sapphire Bladesmen is going to be too much for them to bear in the long run. I mean, obviously the cavalry was the main thing they still had in reserve, so both teams now really are at the point where everything is just being thrown in. Belfast Marines in reasonable condition. The Trebuchet of Mordor also is much the same. Yeah, really nothing left now for Dol Amroth. This will be a decisive engagement on the field, I think. Horse Guard again, not really a charge, but still able to get surround off on the units that are here. Temple Guard and Flag Rim outnumbered now. Uncomfortable engagement for them, to be sure. Temple Guard very stretched as well. Pendrath crossbows on the other hand, still in reasonable condition, still a tough unit to break down as well. Now the cavalry, I mean, still in decent enough shape to the point where now that the battle is becoming more stretched because both forces are simply so depleted, cavalry charges could well prove to be the difference maker. We'll have to wait and see. The North, meanwhile, we're on top in this engagement in most aspects for a long time in this fight. It is still very, very even, but Gondor now finally able to get their own supporting units into place, although they are being hounded by Rhun up there. It is an even fight. The Fountain Guard, the strongest unit here, but having to deal with the numbers and also more of a phalanx, well, actually an even phalanx presence, so yeah, Gondor probably should be winning that fight in the long run, but the Carmel's chosen, going up against the Nimlothian on guard, bodyguard to bodyguard, very even as well in terms of the numbers that are left. Spear Malice, but armour piercing of the Nimlothians against the just baseline sword and board of the Carmel's chosen, but with a little bit of extra help from some Gondor archers. That will tip the scales firmly in Gondor's favour there. Victory seeming certain at ground level now for the Fountain Guard. That quality starting to bite. The numbers of the crossbows not going to be enough. Whatever happens to the Dragon Knights? Is this them? It is. It could prove to be very devastating still, because they are the only cavalry unit on the field which is a bodyguard unit just in general, but also as healthy as they currently are. There's a general. Artillery crew to wield those warhammers in anger now. Here, Sapphire Bladesmen still. A few units spare the defenders. Be key. The Dragon Knights come over here as well and get a few charges off the defenders. May very well have turned this fight around, and Dol Amroth lack the staying power, so Gondor might narrowly win in the north, but I think the defenders might very well end up winning by a little bit more here in the south. Them sweeping across, I mean, that's still good use of the javelins though, and based on the fine margins that we're dealing with here, a little bit more of that might be enough to turn the battle around once more. There goes another Dol Amroth general, run through by a phalanx. And if you have the strength to be able to do that. Especially through Imrahil's armour as well. World's strongest man. Gondor. More Shadowbows are there. Athelian Rangers revealing themselves. Gondor Archers returning. So yeah, they are going to be victorious over here, Gondor. The question is going to be by how much. Was a general? I guess runes? That wasn't the runic general model that we saw get sliced, though. Snow-Rim very tired at this point. And the presence of the Fountain Guard is going to be a little bit of a worry if the defenders end up relying on the Dragon Knights to see them over the line. It's going to be a fun time for them. Gondor Archers. I mean, the Shadow Bows should be stronger than the Gondor Archers in melee, so maybe still some minor victories to be had. And like we said, these are the sort of things which can make a big difference going into the tail end of a very close battle like this. Stuck on level geometry again, the camera. Marines firing directly down. One of the rare times you'll see a projectile unit fire directly down from a wall like that. Most of the time they have to loop their shots because of the way that it works. But I guess at the base of a crumbled wall, in that very specific circumstance, is when they are actually able to do what they would do in real life. UNGOL crew looking a bit thin on the ground now as well. Still a few Balthalas Marines in support. Dragon Knights there. I mean, they moved over here, but they, ironically enough, they may well have actually been more useful staying put where they were, because Gondor more likely to break through the lines now. Situation with Dol Amroth, I think, is mostly contained. Javelin's being looped over. The Temple Guard just sort of standing there, not fighting the Balthalas Marines. One of those classic examples of Medieval 2's questionable pathfinding. Looks like the Dragon Knights now, having come all the way over here, are now going to have to go all the way back. They are on a bit of a timer here. Gondor have been victorious at the Gatehouse. Guards of Osgiliath, 29 of them still remain. Want to be avoiding them with the cavalry at all costs. Fountain Guard doing the heavy lifting at ground level, and now going to do the same on the walls. Trying to finish off these Carmel's Shadow Bows. A little bit of help from those Gondor Archers in the distance. That will be a pretty quick fight, all things considered now. Still very much alive and slowly beating the Carmel's Chosen, though as we mentioned they did have a bit of help to do that, and they're going to continue to get help with the Guards of Osgiliath now arriving on station. The slow end of Dol Amroth's hopes in this battle. It is a very close run thing. I mean, you have to remember, I think as well, like the fact that the attack just about petered out and they had to start again could prove to be pretty important. That very unfortunate artillery hit as well. I mean, the Trebuchet did do some things later on, but not enough to make up for that, I think. So it was still very much in arrears. These are the sort of margins that we're working with now, so again, bit of luck, bit of judgment, but the defenders are the ultimate beneficiaries of that. Here, victory seeming certain for the Fountain Guard still. Maybe not killing the Carmel's Shadow Bows off with the immediacy that I thought they might, but again, Rangers do have that high melee defense to keep them alive just that little bit longer. All of Gondor's units are now on the walls, however, which means that the Dragon Knights are not going to be able to get up there to meet them. And taking a warning volley from the Athelian Rangers as well, to let them know they can't just stand there and wait at the base of the wall for them to come off. chosen surrounded and ultimately will be finished off here. Shadow bows will suffer the same fate. Rangers and archers as well. I mean, it's certainly not a limitless force here from Gondor, but it's maybe a little bit more well put together than the defenders are. Sapphire Bladesmen and Temple Guard, I mean, not a great deal. Emperor very depleted. Came down to pure infantry back Gondor here. The wild card really is still this one unit of cavalry, and Gondor ultimately are going to have to leave the safety of that wall at some point and move forwards. And as soon as they do, it's how they can defend against the extreme charge that those cataphracts are going to be able to lay down. Shadowbows completely dealt with. The remnants of the Carmels chosen, who, to be fair to them, have been active since pretty much the initial fights in the battle. And only just now are they being laid low. Guards of Osgiliath as well. I mean, they're going to have to try and deal with them in melee somehow, the defenders, because the cavalry, unless they can get a very fortuitous rear charge on them, would be skewered very quickly. I mean, ultimately there's quite a few of these Gondor units which are good at dealing with cavalry, as they are as a faction overall, as a result of their spear and polearm focus of their infantry. Fountain Guard are now at ground level. I mean, it's probably... is it worth trying to charge into them immediately? You don't have a lot of support, so maybe a hefty charge. Especially considering from an attacking damage dealing perspective, this is by far and away Gondor's most potent unit that they have left, especially when you consider the numbers that they're still in. I mean, pikes are not known for dealing damage, so they're the ones that have to finish off the Carmels chosen. It is going to take a decent amount of time. One remains. Many fall, but one remains. Taking his time, isn't he? It looks like he's been run through so many times with those spears and pikes. Backed up against the battlements of the fort. And there he goes. So now, what do we do? So starters, I think, times 2 speed. Oh, actually, no, maybe not. Say times 2 speed as things get underway. Ooh, the Fountain Guard showing their sides to the not really the best of charges. Actually, they did get up to... I thought they were just going to do that bumping charge. They got up to speed right at the last moment there, and that is a big charge. Large amount of damage, just shy of half of that Fountain Guard unit falling by the wayside there. Scarcely the sort of thing which Gondor can afford. We are more or less into the final 10k frames now as well, much of which I'm sure is going to be... I mean, considering where Gondor started, I mentioned the necessity of trying to mitigate the amount of charge damage the Dragon Knights can do as much as possible, and that would be key, and they have not started off too well in that regard. A good charge into the Fountain Guard and a good charge into the Athelian Rangers, cutting down on that Gondorian manpower almost immediately. They need to just consolidate their units into a big ball, really, because they've got plenty of units that have got anti-cavalry damage. The archers, regular Gondor archers, are not necessarily going to do tons of damage to Dragon Knights from the front with their heavy armour and their shields. A bold move to attack the Fountain Guard from the front, but the Fountain Guard at this point have got low enough numbers that the Dragon Knights can get away with it, really. And that really did bear out there, because they're going to be able to cycle charge the Fountain Guard into oblivion now. And then they can get to work on those archers as the arrows go whizzing past. I mean, a few are falling as a result of this ranged pressure, but it's not going to be quick enough, you would suggest. And indeed, the Dragon Knights continuing their charge forward. Last samuraiing the Athelian Rangers. Another decent charge, and this damage that they're racking up here, the Dragon Knights, should give the edge to the travelling infantry that Mordor and Rhun have coming across to try and finish Gondor off. Again, the core of the settlement is something we won't actually see in this battle, which is a bit of a shame. See, it is very much a three-layered settlement, really. You've got the final stand here at the back, but you've also got this layer. There is also, technically, the approaches over here, so there's many ways the defenders can approach things, really. There's flyovers that can be used for archers and the like, but again, a 3v2 is always likely that you're going to see a more concentrated engagement because there's simply less armies on the field to work with. As we have seen here, Dragon Knights still pretty healthy as well, not too many of them have fallen, especially when you consider the amount of punishment that Gondor have taken. You may as well try and finish off the Fountain Guard here. I think that's exactly what the Dragon Knights are going to do. The Fountain Guard, who are so effective in that fight against the runic infantry on the gatehouse. Normally as well, of course, the Fountain Guard are going to be able to do good damage to cavalry, but the problem was that initial charge took away their numbers. And once it was pretty much even numbers, cavalry to infantry, the charge is always going to be devastating, no matter if you're a anti-cavalry unit or not. Maybe braced pikes are the only situation there where that can backfire on the cav, quite literally, but not there. Big destruction of the Fountain Guard before the remaining defending infantry even arrives. Charge straight into the Nimlothians as well. Pulling up before they do. Nimlothians maybe have a little bit more about them when it comes to anti-cavalry because of the more defensive set nature of them. He's got the Guards of Osgiliath on the front, really. Slow but sure damage with those arrows as well. Some of these units starting to make their way across. I mean, the Athelian Rangers should do a good amount of damage to them on the approach, along with those Gondor archers. I'll go up to ×2 speed here as well, because that's, or even actually ×6 speed. Athenian Rangers off the walls now. Consolidation being the key. Dragon Knights moving forward once again. To do what? Try and charge in from the side, but the Guards of Osgiliath trying to cover their bases. What are they going to do? Are they going to try and charge into the Guards of Osgiliath? I don't know if that's... I mean, there's not that many of them. It's not even a charge, really. They just bumped into them. Under arrow fire and bumping into pikes is going to be very, very painful for the Dragon Knights, who have been so effective here in the late game. And as they turn to leave, not as many of them died there as I thought they might. Maybe it was a blessing in disguise that they weren't able to get that initial charge damage. I think maybe ×2 speed is probably the play here. Still really waiting on the defending infantry to get down here before things get into full swing. Gondor archers just trying to do the damage necessary. They did get the charge off that time, and again, just not enough of the infantry. That's the thing. Like when cavalry has like even numbers with infantry, even when it's this sort of thing, the sheer mass and the heft of the charge, especially when you've got that full charge bonus of 20, which the Dragon Knights have, it's always going to be pretty devastating. And the defenders in a very good place, and the cavalry was pretty key in this battle, albeit from a defender's perspective, more so from the attackers. The Swan Knights do have the same damage capabilities as the Dragon Knights. They're not as resilient. They do have that same damage dealing potential. If that had been something they were able to utilise later in the engagement on the south, maybe the attackers would be in a slightly better place. As it is, that is not the case. Crossbows. Finally, the remaining defensive infantry is arriving. Slowly but surely getting themselves into place. Again, opening up with a nice charge. Hefty damage there on the Athelian Rangers. Sapphire Bladesmen will move in to continue that good work, I'm sure. And then Lothian Honor Guard are there now as well. Cavalry buzzing around. Now that it's got the help of the infantry managing to siphon off some of Gondor's attention, the effectiveness of the cavalry should only increase, really. Panzer forces evenly matched. Some of the Sapphire Bladesmen stragglers still arriving. The fact they still have halberds is also a nice thing. I mean, it's only 17 of them, but given the battered nature of everyone at this stage of the proceedings, it's always nice to have a phalanx unit, though they are the ones being targeted by the archers on the walls. Ranger to ranger combat as well between the Ardennai and the Athelian. Yeah, still a unit Temple Guard as well. They needed the full force of that infantry still alive with the Fountain Guard and everything Gondor if they were going to be super competitive here going into the final stages, but the cavalry did its work. Now it's just a case of the defenders cleaning things up, you would think, unless something remarkable happens, like a hidden unit reveals itself. Even then, I don't really know what Gondor or Dol Amroth have in terms of hidden units that would be enough to significantly turn things around from this point onwards. Our archers have been firing away for quite a while. I mean, again, they're not the most damaging archer, but trying their best to provide overwatch here, but that's not going to continue for too much longer with the Temple Guard bearing down on them. They'll need every bit of those armour upgrades now. They've been trying to fire away at those Dragon Knights as well, but again, heavy armour, multiple hit points, shielded, always going to be tough. Temple Guard doing the business there. Still 25 Nimlothian Honor Guard, that's not a meagre amount in all fairness. Athelian Rangers dealt with. Oh, I see, they're fleeing? They're routing? I think. How bizarre. Medieval 2 at its finest once more. Yeah, this is surely going to be the point of difference now. In fact, I'm surprised that we're still looking at over 2,000 frames worth of combat if the Nimlothians are the only ones left and they're going to get cycle charged by the Dragon Knights. Maybe the best example of their sheer resilience, I guess. Temple Guard still looming large. It's not super swift to cycle charge, which is maybe why there's still a fight to be had, although you need to be a little bit careful because there's not really anything left of their infantry like over here now. And there's 18 Nimlothian Honor Guard, a few more of them will die from charge damage, and there's still the Temple Guard as well, 15 of them, so I mean the presence of them, but I mean it's going to come down to an easily countable number of units. A very, very close battle indeed. Again, I was a bit suspicious of a 3v2 on this map because it is a large map designed for pretty much a full lobby. I was wondering how well it was going to work, but it has actually turned out to be a very good battle indeed. Yeah. Another charge coming in. Guard joining the fray as well. Gondor archers, are they coming back? They are. 45 of them? I mean, if they didn't rout, that could have been enough to make a significant difference, but by the time they do get back here, pretty much all of the Nimrothian Honor Guard will have been killed off, so morale also. Another one of those fine margins which has pushed the battle in the defenders' direction. Any one of those things, like the artillery hit, morale, some units breaking, better care taken of the Fountain Guard, that sort of thing. Any one of those things goes the other way, and that could be enough to give the attackers the win here. Such is the way of things. Now, there's on time to 6 it up to the point where the Gondor archers get up on the walls and pretty inevitably flee immediately. Shaken. And they're going to flee in the face of not a huge amount of runic units. Oh, he admits defeat. Well, actually, no, the Dol Amroth player admits defeat. Both Dol Amroth players doing the same. Close fought. Again, could very much have gone either way. Oh, they do flee in the end. It wouldn't have made a difference. Temple Guard, as soon as they move forward, they would have routed. And so there we go. CIRITH UNGOL. Defended successfully by Mordor and their Easterling followers, and you can see here, I mean, I've already mentioned really why the battle went the way that it did. I think the defenders played well, and they are good value for the win. I think the attackers, again, just some of it is luck. I mean, that artillery strike, that, you know, when you consider that most of those kills was like half a unit of Talon Knights, could have made a big difference in the long run. And yeah, you could argue that the trebuchet maybe shouldn't have been firing with that sort of angle, given, you know, the dangers of using artillery, but that was very unlucky. Like, you can't really, you know, account for stuff like that when you're trying to bring down a wall as well. Other things, though, like I said, better care taken of the Fountain Guard. You know, in the late game there, Gondor did make it easier for Rhun to utilise those Dragon Knights than maybe they really should have. But again, it's one of those things, you live and you learn. And a few other things as well, like morale. That's again something which the game itself is, you know, responsible for. So it's not the sort of thing which the attackers have direct control over, but again, it's more of a build-up of other factors, which means that your units are fleeing, and that unit of Gondor archers fleeing in the late game. Could that have made a difference? Maybe. If they'd have been alongside the Nimrothian Honor Guard on the walls away from the Dragon Knights, maybe that could have allowed Gondor to fight their way back into it. But again, we'll never know now. Having a look at what did the damage for Mordor, Temple Guard and Temple Executioners both doing very, very well. Again, Temple Guard at range and in melee, but much of it being in close proximity with those Dol Amroth infantry units. Nazgul, despite an initial, you know, less than ideal engagement for them, they still ratcheted up the kill count, as did the Olag High. So all of the key units for Mordor doing well. Uruk Chieftains maybe not doing quite so well as I'd expect them to do, given the kind of engagement they were in. Sauron's Will with a massive 558 kill count, which is very, very impressive against the standard rank and file of Dol Amroth, isolating those units. Again, that's a sort of a performance which can really make it difficult for the opposition. Good performance from the Halberds as well. Not enough Halberds from Dol Amroth to meet Mordor's challenge in that regard, I think, is another takeaway from the compositions that both sides decided to bring. Less cavalry, more halberdiers for Dol Amroth. The battle probably goes the other way. But yeah, big thank you to Thanatos for sending this one in. Big thank you to all the players as well for being a part of this battle replay. The next one that's going to be coming out is going to be a battle on Ost in Eyrie, which is another sort of, we've seen it before, it's a cityscape style map, so that's going to be attack defense as well. And also in the upcoming couple of weeks I want to be doing the Numenor and the Shire faction overviews to finish that series up. And following on from that, we'll see. I've still got a few replays in the backlog, but they're on maps that we've seen recently, like Fornost to Rhine and Ankalimon. So yeah, we'll just see how that goes. That's replays in reserve for hopefully later in the year, so that we can make a return to those maps at some stage. But yeah, we'll see. Big thank you to Thanatos once again, and big thank you to all the players. Hope you enjoyed this. I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.